The frost had come early that year, silvering the stable windows before the last leaves had properly fallen, and it was in that cold, star-hard dark that the old hound began to die. She had been named Fern once, though almost no one at Ashcombe Hall remembered it now. They called her only the Duke's dog, or sometimes just the old grey one. The one who limped along the east wall in the mornings and slept by the kitchen fire in the afternoons, and who now lay on a bed of straw in the farthest stall with her breath coming shallow and slow, her muzzle white as the frost outside, her ribs rising and falling like a bellows losing air. The young woman who knelt beside her had been mending harness leather in the tack room when she heard the whimper, and she had not left since. "Come and sit with me a while, if you will. Pull your chair a little closer to the fire, because what I have to tell you happened on a night nearly as cold as this one, in a house not so very different from the one you are sitting in now. And it is the kind of story that wants company in the telling. If you find yourself moved by where it goes, and I think you will, I would be glad if you stayed to the end and told me so in the comments below, and glad too if you subscribed, so that you might be here for the next one. But for now, let us leave the fire behind and go back to that stable, and that girl, and that dying dog, because there is a great deal you do not yet know about how she came to be there, and why what happened at dawn would change the whole shape of her life. Her name was Wren Fairholt, and she had come to Ashcombe Hall 4 years before in the back of a carrier's cart, with a single trunk and a letter of reference from a vicar's wife who had taught her to read and to sew and precious little else. Because there had been precious little else to teach a girl whose parents were both dead of the fever within a fortnight of one another, leaving her, at 15, with no household, no dowry, and no expectation of one. She had been given a place in the linen room at first, turning collars and darning stockings by candlelight until her eyes ached. And it was there she had learned the particular invisibility of servants who are neither pretty enough to be remarked upon nor clumsy enough to be scolded, the kind of girl a great house simply absorbs, the way a stone wall absorbs ivy, until no one can quite recall a time before she was there. She did not mind it, or told herself she did not. She had grown up learning not to expect notice, and there is a kind of peace in that, however cold it runs. She rose before the other maids, banked the kitchen fire, mended what wanted mending, and in the evenings, when her work was done, she went to the stables, because the stables were the one place in that vast house where nobody minded if she talked to the animals as though they understood her, and where, in truth, she suspected that they did. It was the horses she had first loved, and then the dogs, and among the dogs it was Fern most of all, the Duke's old grey hound, arthritic and half-blind, who had outlived 2 head grooms and, it was rumoured below stairs, outlived a young master whose death nobody at the hall spoke of above a whisper. Wren did not know the particulars of that grief, only that the house carried it the way a house carries damp, in the walls, in the silences, in the way certain rooms were kept shut up and dustless and never entered. She knew only that Fern had been the old Duke's favourite, and was now, by some unspoken inheritance, beloved by the new one, though the new Duke was rarely seen at the hall and never, so far as Wren knew. seen at all by anyone below the rank of steward. He was said to prefer his townhouse, his ledgers, his solitude. He was said to be cold. She had no reason to doubt it and no particular interest in the question until the night, some months before that fatal frost, when she had first found a man she did not recognize sitting on an overturned bucket in the stable yard at dusk, speaking low and easy to a nervous colt, as though he had all the time in the world and nowhere on earth he would rather be. He had introduced himself that evening as Reese Hale, newly taken on to help with the horses over the winter, a huntsman's son, he said, come down from the north, handy with animals and looking for steady work. He was not dressed as a gentleman, wore no fine cloth, spoke plainly, and his hands, when Wren noticed them, were roughened and sure the way a working man's hands are roughened and sure. Not soft the way she imagined a lord's would be. She thought nothing more of it. She had no cause to. And so it was Reese, and not any duke, that she came to know over the following weeks, in the ordinary, unremarkable way that two people who work near one another come to know each other, a nod in the yard, a shared joke about a stubborn gelding, an afternoon spent together coaxing a foundered mare back onto her feet. He was quiet in a way that made her curious rather than wary. He watched more than he spoke, and when he did speak, it was with a careful precision, as though every word had first been weighed and found necessary before it was permitted to be said. She did not know then that this was a habit worn into him by years of being listened to too closely, by a lifetime of learning that a duke's careless word could ruin a man's livelihood in an afternoon, and that he had come to measure every sentence accordingly. She only knew that she liked him, in the plain and undramatic way one likes a person whose company does not require performance. The night fern began to die. Wren was alone. It was late October, the estate quiet, most of the household abed, and she had gone out to the stables with a lantern to check on a mare due to foal within the week, when she heard the old hound's laboured breathing from the far stall and understood, in the way one understands such things without being told, that this was not a passing illness, but an ending. She did not run for the head groom, who she knew for a fact was 3 parts drunk in the village that night, nor for the housekeeper, who would only have wrung her hands and sent for someone else again. She simply sat down in the straw, drew the old dog's grey head into her lap, and stayed. She had no medicine to give her, no remedy that would matter now, and she knew it. What she had was warmth, and a voice, and the willingness not to let a creature die alone in the dark simply because no one of consequence was there to witness it. She talked to Fern for hours, about nothing of importance, about the mare and her foal, about the frost on the windows, about a story the vicar's wife had once told her of a dog that waited 7 years at a crossroads for a master who never returned. She held the hound's paw in her hand because it seemed, somehow, to steady the animal's breathing when she did, and because it steadied something in herself as well, some old grief she had never properly put down. The fire in the tack-room stove burned low and then out. The frost thickened on the panes. She did not sleep, and she did not leave. though her legs went numb beneath her and her fingers stiffened with cold, because it did not occur to her that leaving was a thing a person could decently do. She did not know, sitting there in the dark with that dying animal's paw in her hand, that the hound she comforted had been the last living thing to have known the Duke's younger brother, dead 3 years now of a fall from a horse the old dog herself had once been trained beside. She did not know that the man who would find her at dawn had spent 3 years unable to enter that particular stable without a grief so total it had driven him, more than once, from his own house entirely, which was the truer reason Ashcombe Hall so rarely saw its master. She did not know that the Reese Hale she had come to know these past weeks, easy and plain spoken in the stable yard, was in fact Reese Aldrich Camborne, 7th Duke of Ashcombe, who had taken to working anonymously among his own grooms, not from eccentricity, but from a need, sharpened by grief. To know whether there existed in his household a single soul who would treat a dying, useless, unglamorous old dog with tenderness when there was nothing whatsoever to be gained by it, and no one of consequence watching to reward the kindness. He would learn the answer to that question before the sun rose, and it would undo him rather more completely than he expected. He came into the stable a little before dawn, cloaked against the cold, having risen early, as he often did now, sleepless, restless with old sorrow, to check on the mare himself, and it was the lantern light, guttering low, but still burning in the farthest stall, that drew him down the aisle rather than out to the paddock. He stopped in the stall doorway and did not, at first, say anything at all. Wren was still there. Her back was against the wooden partition, her legs curled beneath her cloak. She had given her own cloak to the dog hours before, laying it over Fern's thin flank when the shivering had grown pitiful to see, long since surrendered, so that she sat in nothing but her wool dress in air cold enough to frost a window pane, and her hand, chapped and red from years of laundry water and harsh soap, was still curled around the old hound's paw. Fern's breathing had gone very shallow by then, very slow, the great patient heart winding down toward its last hour, and Wren's head had dropped forward with exhaustion. Though she was not asleep, she would tell him later that she had been afraid to sleep, afraid that if she did, the dog would slip away without anyone's hand to hold, and she could not bear that thought, for a dog or for anyone. He stood in that doorway for what felt to him a very long time, though it could only have been a minute or two, and something in his chest, something that had been clenched tight as a fist for 3 years, loosened, just slightly, just enough to ache, in an entirely different way than grief aches. He did not know in that moment whether what he felt was grief for the brother this old dog had loved, or gratitude that someone in his household had loved her too, unasked and unwatched, or something else entirely that he was not yet ready to name. What he knew, with the plain certainty of a man who had spent years learning to distrust flattery and performance in every form, was that nobody performs kindness for a dying animal at 4 a.m. in an empty stable. There was no one to see it. There was no reward to be had. There was only a girl with numb hands and a stiff back who had decided, of her own accord, that no living thing under this roof would die unaccompanied while she had breath to sit beside it. Wren did not hear him at first, still murmuring low words to Fern, promising her the fire was not far, that morning was coming, that she need not be afraid. And it was only when Fern's paw twitched faintly beneath her palm, a small final gesture of acknowledgement, that Wren looked up and found the man she knew as Rhys Hale standing there, his face unreadable in the lantern light, his eyes fixed not on her, but on the dog. And then, slowly, on her chapped and reddened hand still wrapped around the old hound's paw, as though letting go were a thing she simply did not know how to do. She would remember, afterward, that he did not ask why she was there. He did not scold her for the ruined dress, or ask why she had not summoned the groom, or remark, as anyone else in that house might have, on the impropriety of a laundry maid sitting alone in a stable through the small hours with a man's dying hound. He crossed the stall instead, knelt down on the frozen straw beside her without the smallest concern for his own coat, and laid his hand very gently over both of theirs, hers and the dog's together, and said only, "You should not have had to do this alone." And there was something in the way he said it, some weight beneath the plain words, that told Wren, though she could not yet have said why, that he was not speaking only of that night. Fern died a little after sunrise, quietly, without struggle, her breathing simply growing further and further apart, until it did not resume, and Wren wept then, not loudly, not for show, but with the particular grief of a person who has held vigil and knows it is finished. And Rhys Hale, groom of the stables, said nothing at all, only stayed beside her in the cold straw with his hand still resting over hers until the sun had properly risen and the rest of the household had begun to stir. And it was in that silence, more than in anything spoken, that something between them shifted and settled into a shape neither of them yet had a name for. It was Mrs. Pettibone, the housekeeper, who found them there an hour later, and it was Mrs. Pettibone's face, the particular whitening of it, the sudden bob of a curtsy she gave to the man Wren still believed to be a groom, that first planted in Wren's mind the seed of a suspicion she would not let herself fully examine for some weeks yet, because it was easier, in that raw and grieving morning, to simply accept the comfort she had been given than to ask too closely who had given it. The weeks that followed Fern's death brought a change to Ashcombe Hall that Wren noticed before she understood it. Small kindnesses began arriving at her door with no name attached to them, a length of good wool cloth left folded on her narrow bed. Enough to make a proper winter cloak to replace the one she had sacrificed to a dying dog, a jar of salve for chapped hands, the kind sold only in the apothecary in the county town, far beyond what a laundry maid's wages could purchase, and, most tellingly, a note from the estate's physician informing her that her elder cousin's outstanding debt for a broken leg set the previous spring had been quietly settled in full, though Wren had never told a living soul at Ashcombe about that debt, had in fact gone to great pains to keep her family's poverty a private shame rather than a public one. She asked Mrs. Pettibone about it, carefully, and Mrs. Pettibone only pressed her lips together, and said that some things in a great house were better left unquestioned, which was. Wren was beginning to understand the housekeeper's particular way of confirming a thing without saying it outright. She saw Rhys often in those weeks, in the ordinary course of the stable work, and he gave no sign of being anything other than what he claimed, plain-spoken, unhurried, easy with the horses, and, increasingly, easy with her. They talked of small things. He asked once with a carefulness that surprised her whether her hands still pained her from the cold nights she'd spent nursing Fern, and when she said they had healed well enough, he seemed satisfied in a way that felt disproportionate to so small an answer, as though her comfort mattered to him rather more than a groom's ordinary courtesy would explain. She began, without quite admitting it to herself, to look forward to the hour each evening when her work was done, and she could find some excuse to pass by the stable yard. It was Tam, the youngest of the grooms, freckled and not yet skilled at holding his tongue, who let the truth slip one grey afternoon while Wren was helping muck out the far stalls. He had made some offhand remark about how strange it was that the master himself had taken such an interest in the new mare's foaling, and when Wren asked, puzzled, which master he meant, Tam had gone pale and stammered something about Mr. Hale being closer with his Grace than most, being family friends from the north, before fleeing the stable entirely rather than answer further questions. And Wren was left standing amid the straw with a cold, sinking understanding beginning to take root in her chest, one she did not want to believe and could not quite make herself dismiss. She confronted him the following evening, plainly, because plainness was the only language she trusted in matters that mattered. She asked him directly, in the stable yard, in the fading light, whether he was truly a groom's son from the north, or whether he was something else entirely, and she watched his face for the answer before he gave it, because she had learned in 4 years below stairs to read the difference between a man arranging his features and a man simply being honest, and what she saw in him then was neither denial nor deflection, but something that looked almost like relief, as though he had been waiting and dreading and hoping for this question in equal measure. My name, he said slowly, is Rhys Aldrich Camborne. I am, for my sins, the Duke of Ashcombe. He did not soften it, did not dress it in apology or excuse. I did not tell you because I wished for once in my life to be looked at without the title standing in front of me. I wished to know whether there was a single person in my own household who would be kind to a dying, useless old dog with no one of consequence watching and no reward to be had for it. I have my answer. I am sorry for the manner in which I got it, but I am not sorry to have it. Wren said nothing for a long moment. She felt, more than anything, a kind of vertigo, the sensation of ground she had thought solid tilting beneath her, because every gentle word he had spoken to her these past months, every quiet evening in the stable yard, every note of concern about her chapped hands, had all along been spoken, not by a groom, but by the master of the very house that employed her. The man whose word could end her position with a sentence, whose rank made anything she might feel toward him a kind of foolishness she had not permitted herself to examine too closely. You let me believe a lie, she said finally, and her voice, though quiet, carried an edge he had not yet heard from her. For months. I did, he agreed, without excuse. It was wrong of me, and I will not pretend otherwise. But I want you to know that nothing I said to you in that stable was untrue. The man who sat beside Fern that night, who held your hand over her paw and told you that you should not have had to grieve alone, that man was not a disguise. That was the truest thing I have been in 3 years. He paused. I understand if you cannot forgive the deception. I ask only that you not doubt the man beneath it. She did not answer him that evening, and he did not press her, and for some days a careful distance opened between them that neither quite knew how to close, Wren too proud and too wounded to seek him out, Rice too aware of the wrong he had done her to force himself upon her notice. It was into this uncertain quiet that Lady Cassia Hale Vernon arrived at Ashcombe Hall, a distant cousin of the Duke's on his late mother's side, ostensibly come to pay her respects on the anniversary of the younger Cambourne brother's death, but understood by every servant in the house within the hour of her arrival to have come, in fact, to secure for herself the position that 3 years of the Duke's reclusive grief had left conspicuously unclaimed. Lady Cassia was beautiful in the particular arranged way of a woman who had spent a lifetime being told her beauty was her chief asset and had therefore polished it as diligently as another woman might polish silver. She had a laugh that arrived in 3 precise notes, always at exactly the moment calculated to draw the most attention, and an instinct, sharpened by years in society's more competitive drawing rooms, for locating another woman's most vulnerable point and pressing upon it lightly, publicly, and with an air of perfect innocence. She found Wren's vulnerable point within a day of her arrival, and it was, of course, her hands, red and roughened from years of lye soap and cold water, marked in a way no lady's hands ever were, and Lady Cassia made great, gentle sport of them at the first dinner she attended below the family's notice, remarking within Wren's hearing to a circle of amused guests. How remarkable it was that the Duke kept such rustic creatures so near his person, how sweet really in its way, like keeping a favourite barn cat. And the laughter that followed, however brief, landed on Wren with the precision of a blow expertly placed. Wren said nothing in response, because there was nothing a laundry maid could decently say to a lady in a room full of witnesses. And she went back to her work that night with her chapped hands burning with a shame that had nothing to do with lye soap, and it was this, more than the deception in the stable, that convinced her fully of a truth she had already half known, that whatever she had begun to feel for the man in that stable, whatever tenderness had grown up between them in the dark over a dying dog, could have no possible future in a world where women like Lady Cassia set the terms of what was permissible, and men like the Duke, whatever their private kindness, were bound by rank and expectation to marry within their own sphere. Lady Cassia was not finished, however, and her methods grew sharper as the weeks wore on, and it became clear to her that the Duke's attention, however he tried to disguise it, kept returning to the laundry maid rather than to herself. She began, quietly and with great apparent concern for the household's good order, to suggest to the housekeeper and then to the estate's steward that certain small items had gone missing from the family's private effects since Wren's promotion, begun, at the Duke's own quiet instruction, from the linen room into service nearer the house, mentioning with feigned reluctance that she hated to cast suspicion, but that a girl of such evident poverty, with a sick relation to support, and a debt only recently and mysteriously cleared, might understandably be tempted, and surely it was only prudent to have the matter looked into before it became a scandal that touched the family's name. The accusation, once planted, spread through the household with the terrible speed such things always do. Within a fortnight, a formal letter had been drawn up by the estate's steward, a man named Grissom, long in the family's service and, Wren would later learn, rather too dependent upon Lady Cassia's favour and the promise of advancement she had dangled before him, citing irregularities in the household accounts that coincided with damning tidiness, with Wren's period of increased access to the family's rooms, and recommending her immediate dismissal without character, a sentence that would follow her to any future position and effectively end her prospects of honest work anywhere in the county. Wren learned of the letter not from Grissom, nor from Lady Cassia, but from Mrs. Pettibone, who came to her in the linen room white-faced and furious on her behalf. And it was in that moment, faced with the ruin of everything she had built for herself in 4 careful years, that Wren felt the full, cold weight of what it meant to be poor and unconnected in a house where a lady's word carried the force of law and a maid's carried none at all. She thought, briefly and bitterly, of going to Reese to the Duke and laying the whole matter before him, but pride stopped her, pride and a raw, aching doubt that had taken root since the night of his confession. What if he, too, found it easier to believe the word of his own cousin, a woman of his rank and blood, over the word of a servant he had, after all, deceived first? What if the tenderness in the stable had been real only in that one desperate hour of shared grief, and could not survive contact with the ordinary machinery of a great house protecting its own? She very nearly packed her trunk that night and left before the dismissal could be formally delivered, sparing herself the humiliation of being turned out, and it was only Mrs. Pettibone, gripping her by both hands in the cold linen room, who stopped her. "I have known that man since he was in short coats," the housekeeper said fiercely, "and I have watched him grieve his brother till I feared he would grieve himself into the grave alongside him. And I tell you now, girl, that the only time in 3 years I have seen him look like himself again was the morning he came in from that stable with old Fern's death on him, and something else besides. Something I hadn't seen on his face since before the accident. You do not know him if you think he would let a scheming cousin's lies stand between the two of you without so much as a hearing. But he cannot defend you against a thing he does not know is happening. Go to him. Tonight, do not let pride cost you what grief nearly cost him." It was this, more than anything, that turned Wren from the door. And it was Mrs. Pettibone, too, who supplied the missing piece that would unmake the whole scheme, a set of household ledgers kept in her own careful hand for the years before Grissom's appointment, which she had never fully surrendered to the steward's keeping, and which showed, in black and white, expenditures against the family's private accounts, stretching back nearly 2 years, debts paid, purchases made, correspondence conducted, all authorised under Grissom's own hand and all directed, upon careful examination, not toward the estate's benefit but toward Lady Cassea's personal accounts in town, a pattern of quiet embezzlement conducted by a steward eager to secure his patronesses. Favour and, it would later emerge, a promised position as her own estate's manager once she had secured the Duke as her husband. Wren went to Rees that same night, ledgers in hand, her pride set aside in favour of a colder and more useful anger, and found him in the estate office still at his desk, though the hour was late, and she laid the whole of it before him without preamble, Grissom's letter, the accusation against her, and Mrs. Pettibone's ledgers showing where the true theft had run. He listened without once interrupting her, his face growing very still in a way she was learning to recognise as the particular stillness he wore when something had struck him deeply, and when she had finished, he did not reach for her hand or offer comfort, because he understood. With the same precision that had marked every careful word he had spoken to her, that what she needed from him in that moment was not tenderness, but justice, plainly and thoroughly done. The reckoning, when it came, was neither loud nor swift. Rees called Grissom to the estate office the following morning, ledgers spread across the desk, and asked him a series of quiet, exact questions about specific transactions, dates and signatures, watching the steward's composure crack by degrees as each carefully documented discrepancy was laid before him, until Grissom, faced with evidence he could neither explain nor deny, confessed the whole scheme, his own embezzlement, and Lady Cassea's knowledge of it, and her promise to protect him from discovery in exchange for his manufactured evidence against Wren. Lady Cassea herself, summoned to the same office an hour later and shown the same ledgers, attempted first denial, and then, when denial proved useless, a brittle, furious appeal to family loyalty, to blood being thicker than the claims of a laundry maid. And Rees listened to all of it with the same controlled stillness, and then told her, in a voice that carried no heat at all, and was therefore more final than any shout could have been, that she would leave Ashcombe Hall within the day, that no criminal charge would be brought against her out of consideration for his late mother's memory, but that she would receive no further welcome under his roof, nor any further countenance from his family for as long as he lived. Grissom was dismissed without character, but likewise without prosecution, on the condition of full and immediate restitution, a mercy Rees extended, he told Wren afterward, not because the man deserved it, but because vengeance had never yet mended anything. And he had spent 3 years learning the difference between justice and cruelty the hard way. It was that evening, with the house settling back into its ordinary rhythms and the scandal already beginning to fade into the particular hush that follows a great household's crisis, that Rees found Wren once more in the stable yard, standing near the stall where Fern had died. And he came to stand beside her, without speaking, for a long moment, the two of them watching the last light fail over the paddocks. "I owe you an apology I have not yet properly given," he said at last, "not for the deception in the stable, though I owe you that too, but for letting a fortnight pass in which you believed I might choose blood over truth. I should have made it plainer to you, before any of this began, that I would not." He turned to face her fully then. "I did not court you as Rhys Hale to win your regard under false pretences, Wren. I sought you out because I wished, in the one part of my life still unmarked by title, to be known as myself. Everything I felt in that stable, I have felt every day since, growing rather than fading. Deception or no, I am not offering you a duke's hand out of guilt or obligation, or the tidy resolution such a story is supposed to have. I am asking you, plainly, as the man who held your hand over a dying dog's paw at 4 a.m, because I could not bear for you to grieve alone, whether you would consider building a life with that same man, whatever title happens to trail after him. There is no debt here to repay, on either side. Only a question, freely asked, that you are entirely free to refuse." Wren looked at him for a long moment, and something in her chest that had been braced and guarded since the night of his confession finally, quietly, let go. "I did not fall for a duke," she said. "I fell for a man who would not let an old dog die alone, and who told me the truth the moment I asked for it. Even knowing what it might cost him, I see no reason that man should need to apologize further for the coat he wears in daylight." And when he smiled at that, a real smile, unguarded, the kind Mrs. Pettibone would later swear she had not seen on his face since before his brother's death, Wren found she was smiling too, there in the cold yard. With the ghost of an old greyhound's memory settled quietly between them like a blessing rather than a grief. They were married the following spring, not in the grand chapel in town that the old Duke had favoured for such occasions, but in the small stone church nearest the hall, among tenants and grooms and the ordinary people of the estate, who had known Wren first as a laundry maid and had come, over the winter, to understand precisely why their reclusive master had finally come home to himself. Mrs. Pettibone wept openly through the whole ceremony and denied it fiercely afterward. Tam the groom, restored to good favour, held the ring on a cushion with an expression of such solemn importance that half the church struggled not to laugh. There was no grand society gathered to witness it, no correspondence from the London papers, only the small, warm crowd of people who had actually known the two of them, which was, Wren thought, watching Rhys's face as she came up the aisle, precisely as it should be. A year later, almost to the week, a new hound slept by the kitchen fire at Ashcombe Hall, a rangy, good-natured pup that Wren had rescued, half-starved, from a ditch along the estate road and raised over the intervening months into a dog of considerable devotion and no particular breeding, much to the private amusement of the head groom, who observed that the Duchess did seem to have a habit of finding the estate's most unglamorous creatures and loving them into worth. Grissom, it was learned, had taken a modest position on a distant relation's farm in the north and troubled Ashcombe no further. Lady Cassia's name was rarely spoken at all, and when it was spoken with the particular flatness reserved for chapters a household has firmly closed. And on the anniversary of Fern's death, as the frost came early again that year, silvering the stable windows just as it had the year before, Wren went out at dusk, as she did each year now, and sat a while in the old stall, with the new pup curled warm against her side, and told him, as she always did, the story of the dog who had waited 7 years at a crossroads for a master who never returned, though this time, when she finished, it was not grief that settled in the quiet afterward, but something gentler, something like gratitude, for she had learned in that same stable, on that same cold ground, that some vigils are rewarded after all, and that the truest kindnesses, offered freely and without witness, have a way of finding their way home to you at dawn,